Alrighty then. Hey, welcome everybody. James Waddell with Cognitive Corp. Very much appreciate you joining us live. If you're watching the recorded session, thank you for that as well. Again, very interactive session. If you guys have been with us in the past, so please, in the chat window, feel free to engage us with comments, conversations, and all are good. We'll do our best to weave those into the conversation as we go. So, interesting show today. Office redo or workplace Redux. No, that's not right. We'll let Mike describe what today's show is as I introduce my co-host, which is why I need a co-host. Mike, how are you?
Good. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining. Yeah, we've got a pretty interesting show today, and it's all about having the discussion, right? Because things happen because we get ideas through having these kind of conversations and discussions. So, absolutely chime in on the chat at any point in time. The focus is on what do you do, right? I mean, and we're hearing a lot of acronyms out there, right? I mean, WTH was work from home, or WFH was work from home, work from office, hybrid, and all of that. So how do you kind of put that in a box and then take the pieces out, put it back, and now understand what it is that you want to go off and do? So that's kind of the deal. And James, if you mind, and why don't you go ahead and introduce our special guests?
Super awesome. Our first guest is Gary. Gary, how are you, sir? If you could take a moment, let our audience know a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Gary McCunis. I'm the strategy director in our work studio at Cunningham, and I'm based in Denver.
Awesome. And now Dan. Dan, a little bit about yourself, sir.
Hi there. Dan Dolan with Cunningham Group. I'm actually the technical design lead, and happy to be talking offices today.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I'd like to point out Mike has just returned from a de-stressor, so he is the thinking part of our team today, at least on my side. So thank you for being here. Hey, let's hop right in here, right? And Mike said it a little earlier. There's a lot going on in history. There's all these terms, and for some reason, it feels like it's just part of the human behavior to pick only two sides and to be very polarized on what your conversation is. So in this case, it seems to be two very, very distinguished conversations that are occurring in the marketplace on LinkedIn and throughout the research communities even. It's work from office, so we return to office sort of the same way that we always have, or we stay fully remote and continue working the way that we have throughout the pandemic. Or maybe there's this policy procedure where there's some form of hybrid. But I think really what we want to do is just take a step back a little bit and better understand those terms and what they mean. And is that really the only two options that we have? With that, I'd like to turn to Gary a little bit and help unpack this. Gary?
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I think we're living a protracted period of forced work from home. And it seems it's a foregone conclusion that was to either go back to the office or work from office, or the choice, as we have heard, almost a foregone conclusion that hybrid workplace is the grand solution. That's the panacea for everything we experienced in a positive way and or in a negative way over the last year. We don't see it that way necessarily. It's a fork in the road. There's a lot more choices. There's a lot more combinations. Hybrid workplace itself implies that it's a binary choice. And typically that binary choice is now being explained as continuing to work from home, part-time, full-time, or in some fashion, and the option or the requirement to go back to the office. So we think of it not so much as a fork in the road, but as a broader array. And we really do want to just try to introduce some simpler language that people can talk about all these possibilities. As Michael mentioned, there's remote, there's work from home. There's now a distinction I'm hearing about work from home forever, which is what some employees in the workforce are seeking, versus work from home from now, which is sort of a non-committal answer to how long you're going to be able to do that. Work from anywhere, hybrid, we talked about. Hub and spoke, that implies just like central office implies that there's centrality to the hub and something that's remote, or the spoke being more of a satellite. We've heard about flexible, digital first, virtual. I mean, it goes on and on. This is not new. What's new is the adoption, or potentially the adoption, of hybrid at scale. But it's not new because we've heard about virtual work and virtual collaboration for a long time. Telecommuting and telework has been maturing since the 1990s. Co-working came up in the last decade or so and will remain a very viable third-party option. The language is really important to us. The sort of the things we don't want it to include are phrases like return to work, as if people have not been working. I would dare you to ask anybody who's experiencing fatigue right now that they have not been working over the past year as hard as they've ever been. Return to office immediately implies that the flexibility of working from home might dissipate or disappear. And a much better term that we like is reopening. So in simplifying the language, we want to play on this analogy that it's not so much a fork in the road, but it's maybe more of entering a turnabout or a roundabout. So in contrast to the fork in the road, I think we wanted to move on to that image, James, where we're thinking about this, and I think this conversation started with you, James and Mike, was it last February, I think, when Dan and I and others at the Work Studio at Cunningham published an article, Work Design Magazine, about applying software to the employee workplace journey. And certainly that focused on the individual. And individuals are going to be in this turnabout or roundabout every day, making choices if they're allowed or permitted to. But also we're trying to apply that same level of design thinking of applying the journey map now to the organization. How does the organization mobilize from work from home to these other options? So coming out of work from home and in the Western world going clockwise, or I should say counterclockwise, there is obviously the option to work from office. And as we said, hopefully it's not limited to return to office. In the middle of the next exit, we have hybrid, which in most cases is the binary choice of work from home or work from office. Although there is in the literature now mention that it's work from home or work from anywhere, which I think is not maybe the best way to describe the combination of what we mean by hybrid. Because work from anywhere includes a lot more places than two binary choices of home and office. And what we're talking about and joking about before getting on going live here is how many times do you enter a roundabout and you see individuals going around the center several before they realize they missed their exit or which exit they want to use. Organizations are doing the same thing. So we envision that for the foreseeable future, and Mike and James, I know that you guys are in conversations in facility management circles, that facility management groups have heard and have been told they're going hybrid, but the particulars and the practical, even not just the strategic, but the tactical aspects of how that actually happens on a daily basis, those details are still lacking and still in development. So again, just wanted to introduce this much better array of solutions and then get into how they might play out in different ways.
Yeah, Gary, let me ask a question. I'll make a statement, then I'll ask a question. I was engaged in a really good debate on LinkedIn, and ultimately, in the conversation, it came up that hey, we've been helping people do hybrid work for the last 18 years, so we have a good understanding of it. And the alternate position was, well, we haven't really done hybrid work ever before in a post-pandemic world, so there is no clear understanding of it. So I guess what my question would be is, when most people say hybrid, is that was the definition of that a policy that allows you to either work from home X number of days and in the office X number of days, and you have a choice between the two? Or does it give you the freedom to work wherever you feel you should be working best? I think the industry could use that term.
Yeah, and I think Dan and I are seeing clients talk about it in different ways. So there's certainly at one extreme, the management mandate that we're going hybrid. You have the option to work, these 2 or so days from home. On the other 2 or 3 days, you will be in the office on some fixed schedule of everybody's in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or even alternating schedules between A and B groups. But that's definitely where there is some expectation as to how it will work. And at the other end of the spectrum is truly the individual employee having a choice, in this turnabout every day to figure out where they're going to work from and how, based on what's happening. So yes, it has been around for a while, but never everybody in the same situation. I think it's always been viewed as sort of the exception. In some cases, there's an accommodation. I'm sure, I know our friends in HR did not appreciate it being an accommodation, or some employees having that flexibility, or others not having it because managers were deciding about that individual. And then we get into issues of fairness and inclusion, where if not everybody's eligible or potentially offered the same. I think what we're talking about now and why it's different is that everybody's going to be in the same situation. And organizations are going to have to figure out that if they're in a hybrid workplace, is virtual the default? Or are they going to cling to their office-based cultural norms and practices that we wish you were here, but if you're not, we'll include you, in some way. Or maybe again back to that mandate versus freedom spectrum. I think we're going to see organizations everywhere in between.
You know, there's an interesting couple of conversations there, right? We have HR that's now part of the conversation that we have to not accommodate, right? We have to almost lead with HR in terms of what workplace is, but even from a higher level, right? There's this conversation that still needs to be vetted in the industry, in that when we say hybrid, when we say work from anywhere, it's really, I think, two main dimensions, and then we can get into the breakout of what those two dimensions are into this drawing here. But there's a workplace design activity that needs to occur, but there's also a work process definition and activity that needs to occur. So how do we define work in a post-pandemic world, and how do we define workplace? And I think that becomes an interesting conversation to unpack. I know from workplace, what we at Cognitive are saying is HR is really the tip of the spear there. So the initiatives that HR have in place, the physical office that we're talking about, becomes a tool to help embolden or to help make real those initiatives that are typically within HR. So from your guys' perspective, I'm going to go back to you, Gary, and then Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this, but what are we seeing there in terms of who's leading work and workplace definition these days? And what should it be? So let me go to you, Gary.
Again, I think I agree with you in that it's primarily, if it's an HR play, workplace is all about talent. If it's a real estate or facilities play, it's more about place, and then certainly if it's technology, it's process. But I think the whole idea of workplace being much broader than office, or even on any corporate premises, whether it's an office building, a campus, a satellite center, or a co-working space. I think that would affect the whole discussion, and we're definitely advising or suggesting that companies who are still more of an office-based analogy for their culture, the long-term winners, or the winners in the long run, will be those that think of the office as one piece or one part of a much broader workplace strategy, which has not to do simply with when people arrive or leave an office or corporate premise, but from the moment they wake up to the moment they, call it a day at night. The possibility of conducting themselves in work mode is the broader understanding of workplace.
It certainly makes a lot of sense. Adding on to that a little bit, when we think of what's happening in HR, digitization is really a big thing. Really, digitization is a big thing for everybody, and we're trying to figure that out. So what does digitization mean? From an HR perspective, it means being able to bring in the right types of tools, enterprise tools, or maybe even data and data insights to better inform what's happening within our corporate culture, change management, employee engagement, inclusivity, and then certainly employee well-being, especially in mental health in a post-pandemic world. But there's also this digitization happening on the enterprise IT side, and certainly the tools that we're using is an example of that. And that's what helped us get through the pandemic. And then even from a corporate real estate or facility management perspective, there's this notion of being able to digitize the building or to provide some intelligence in the building to help with certain things. But I think even that has changed in a post-pandemic world. Mike, I'd like to go back to you. I know you have a lot of experience in all of three of those dimensions, but anything stand out there? Something that needed to be like really commented on, or is a big change in one of those three areas, or all those
I
areas?
think, obviously HR has spent a lot of time, and I think rightfully so, in trying to get the right level of systems in for their own requirements relative to, HR management. And then certainly thinking about outsourcing. So a lot of them have been very, very busy about that. And the thought being that, at the end of the day, it's really the manager of the of the people, right? It's the team lead of the team that are the ones that really are going to be grappling with, how do I do this? How do I make sure that, in fact, my team is doing what it needs to do, and all those kind of things. Those were always the kind of the excuses. Now we have, data to show that people were very productive during this period, right? So it's not a requirement to come into the office. It needs to be a choice. And I think that's what's so great about the analogy of a turnabout, right? Because you could be making those choices as a team, learning from the choices and adjusting as you require. And I think most of what I've seen and heard is many companies want to give the choice. They're just worried about how to actually then manage it, right? So those are the two things that I think are going to be, key to this. And data is one way to make sure that if you're giving choice like that, and you're giving them the ability your people the ability to do what is required of them relative to the rest of the organization, then yeah, digitization is going to be key, right? I mean, you've got to be able to have the data. You got to be able to look at that data and try to drive some insights that will inform how do you continue to get better at that.
Yeah, I think it is a good setup for really the core of this conversation, and is this a new type of a reset in the way we do work, or are we going back to a slightly redesigned sort of office environment? And I think we have to dive deep into what that means in terms of how and why we might need a physical office. So let me sort of change gears a little bit here and go back to Gary. Gary, let's talk about that a little bit. What is sort of reset versus redo, and what's the impact of those?
Well, I think you kind of hit it on the head when you said going back. I mean, it implies that there is some reversion to previous normal, which may still apply. I think there's a lot of people saying that old normal wasn't working that well to begin with, in terms of meeting all the people in the office. But what we mean, literally, Redux is bringing back or returning something from the past. And like I said, the office was the cultural analogy. Now we see the management mandate at one extreme to return to the office, maybe without a continuation of work from home. And that can be specified or unspecified. At the other extreme, though, I think with Workplace Reset, we're really talking about a repurposed office, or a different understanding as to what is the purpose of the office, to satisfy those needs and requirements that people were not very happy with in the work from home mode. And we made the best of it. We did a lot better than we thought we would, without a lot of change management. But I think here, with the reset, the office purpose is reconsidered. We truly do provide much broader support for distributed work in various ways of working. And it's one overall strategy where the individual can have work from home, work from office, or work from anywhere choice, especially including third places. So, the reason we have this diagram of what has traditionally been talked about is the cross-functional need for HR, IT, and CRE and FM to collaborate is that, I think hybrid can simply, from an HR perspective, only allow for the work from home and work from office intersections here. Mm-hmm. But to really reset this, you have to have what Dan and I call the platform. The digitalization of the digital platform for work has to support any of these modes or all of these modes in varying ways in a very dynamic pattern, week over week, even day over day. So yes, flexibility has been around in HR, just like you were asking earlier of hybrid hasn't it been around a while? We've had flexible work arrangements for decades. There's manuals about how to do them, manuals about advising whether they should be truly formalized or informal, whether they should be an employee written agreement or whether that's between a manager or between the employee and the broader company. But now we've got digital transformation being the glue, and all around here, I don't think that togetherness is going to be limited to having to convene in the office. I think a true workplace reset tries to bring a remote or a hybrid work from home or work from anywhere experience to be as close as possible to a work from office. And if that's the mindset that it's digital or virtual first, and then you decide who's where in the meeting or in the interaction, that's really what we're trying to say here as far as the full gamut. And Dan and I have been talking, and Dan can elaborate when we get to the technologies part, but if it's just home or office, some people predict that it may not be a compelling experience to come back to the office. Everybody's sitting at their desks on Zoom meetings. But it's almost like we need an interstitial space between home and office, and that could be either a physical third place where people can come and go, or it could be a virtual third place. There's now people working on things that are probably not out yet, but they're probably on the verge of in the next 18 to 24 months of having virtual spaces that hopefully we think envision ourselves designing some of them, given our technologies and design. But that virtual collaboration will be on a level or an even playing field. So there's not this distinction between, well, I'm in office full-time or part-time, I'm remote, work from home full-time or part-time. But if it's anywhere, anytime, and it's unlimited choice, then we're all striving for, how do we enable that with the advances in technology to make that as seamless and as fair and equitable as possible. Because you get into all kinds of issues from the HR perspective about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You get into all kinds of talent about hiring remote talent and getting better access to talent or giving people in the workforce better access to jobs. And it's a much broader offering than thinking about simply am I home today or am I in the office today.
Having said that, I ran across some data that was published by McKinsey and Company just recently. So these are recent survey results, and basically what I gleaned from this data set was 68% of the corporations that were surveyed have not developed a detailed communication plan or put a communication plan in place as it relates to what return to office, hybrid working, work from anywhere means to them. And I think ultimately what that is telling is exactly what you just said, Gary. There's so much to consider. There's so many directions that you could possibly take in order to optimize your employee experience, their productivity, their health, and their well-being, that it's almost like we're all frozen and we just don't know how to take that first next step. So let me.
It's getting on the turnabout, James. We were talking about this before, right? It's like getting on the turnabout, and you are literally frozen because you've never done this before, and you don't want to mess it up, right? So, great segue into this kind of discussion.
Yeah, and there's even some more insights we can glean. Thank you for that, Mike. And personally, I have been on roundabouts, but there's certainly people that aren't experienced with roundabouts. So, Gary, sorry, Gary.
I'm not sure if it was the same McKinsey study, but there's another McKinsey insight saying that for 9 out of 10 USA employers, employee experience is a top priority, and yet only 1 in 10 have employee experience integrated into business strategies. Mm-hmm. And those strategies are coming from all different parts of the external market as well as internal market pressures. I'm not sure which survey it was, but there was something about 1/3 of employees think their employers are doing a good job at supporting remote work. Mm-hmm. That means 2/3 don't think they're doing a good job.
Let me go to Dan for a second. Dan, I want to put you on a spot a little bit. So in the conversations that you've had with customers, can you generalize, just as in the industry, as an industry as a whole, where are we in terms of thinking about this digital first approach or this digital platform that we've talked about?
I'd say it's tough to generalize aside from we're all over the place. I think Gary brought it up too. There's just so many options, and the more being presented every day. And of course, when we're talking about things like products or technology that we want to put in front of customers, it's always the solution, right? And right now, I think we're still in kind of an interstitial time. We're still waiting for the perfect product, and in the in-between time, we need to be informed on the decisions we're making. We had a visioning exercise recently where we asked, what's the perfect meeting look like in 50 years, right? When technology is, flying cars and whatever we might have. Really what it looks like is we all have our augmented reality glasses, we're all sitting at our kitchen tables, and the people we're talking to are sitting at the table with us, right? Their avatars are sitting next to us, and that eliminates a lot of the problems we have with meetings, right? But we're not there yet, and we don't want to throw good money after bad, and we don't want our clients to either when it comes to that in-between period. So, we're researching every day what products are out there, what technology can help bridge these gaps. But I think that's why we started our discussion with you so long ago, right? We need to be able to glean insights, and we need to be able to understand, what our clients need and what is working and what isn't.
I hate to bring this up because it's right over my shoulder, but ultimately it really is the reference architecture. Whatever that reference architecture is for that customer at that time, knowing their mid to long-term strategic intent, at least get them on the road. Now, what will probably happen, because this happens with technology all the time, is there might be technology that falls out, there might be newer technology that comes in, but as long as you stay true to your strategic intent, you'll get it right. You don't have to worry about making big investments in something that just isn't going to be usable, right? I think that's the key. We mentioned a little bit of research here, so I want to go back. There's a great book by Dr. Gleb, and I apologize, I can't pronounce Dr. Gleb's last name.
And it's Sapersky.
Sapersky. Oh, thank you, Sapersky. I can pronounce that, Sapersky. So Gary introduced me to this book, and I was very impressed by the research findings and insights that Sapersky was able to pull together. I just wanted to mention just a few of these, but I wanted to give Gary an opportunity here to mention maybe one or two of the things that he found very insightful in this book as well. So, Gary, anything really stand out at you related to the insights from
Well, I think we'll see what actually happens with talent walking, but there's this phrase that's out there now about the Great Resignation. We're already seeing quit rates at higher levels than normal. We're seeing people being offered remote work instead of a signing bonus. We're seeing people talk about a cut in pay as much as 7 or 8% of their annual salary if they're granted remote work. So I think what's clear from this set, and I liked what Dr. Sapersky did here, is a very simple manual that makes it very practical about how to think about this next stage. But one thing that's loud and clear is that you can find a myriad of surveys already done. I'm sure there will be many, many more in the near future. I think the workforce has spoken, and clearly the workforce is saying that flexibility and basically, I guess, telework or remote work is seen as a benefit, and that benefit, if all things are equal across two different employers or job offers, that will sway the decision either to stay or to leave. So I think right away, when you think about workplace more broadly from an HR and IT perspective, this immediately becomes an employer brand issue. And at the center of the employer brand, or your reputation as an employer, is the offering of the workplace experience or work experience we're going to provide you, and the support systems, to make that easy and convenient. So there's a lot of stats in these 10 points here about really balancing the needs of the organization and what it needs to make things more efficient, more effective, more productive, however they measure those things, versus what can happen at the individual level. And because I think it's clear, at least in terms of how the evidence seems to be mounting on these surveys, is that not only is it important, but the workforce is valuing flexibility and flex work in financial terms, in terms of what it's worth to them, given especially what they experienced over the past year.
You know, one of the things that struck me as I was reading the book was a memory of a survey being done in a pre-pandemic world, where the next generation of workers, vast majority of them said they're more than prepared to work from home. Right? They feel that remote is the right approach for them. They can be very productive when they work from home. And I think in a large part they've proven that. But in more recent surveys, this kind of just goes to show how surveys are just point in time. Those same persona groups are now reporting that work from home is very difficult, and they're super excited to get back to some sort of social environment in the office. And it's kind of, once you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the older generation, such as me, we're out in the suburbs, we have an office in our house, but maybe if you're a younger generation living downtown, your office is your bedroom. And you thought that would be kind of cool, but when you got into it, you were productive for a little bit, but then suddenly things could be a lot better if you had some place to do your work.
Well, Dan and I even do this in our own organization. I mean, Cunningham is right now about 250 people. If we generalize, we can really lose a lot of the nuances, because I think we see that not everybody has gone through the same experience over the last year or so. Younger people who have roommates in a small apartment who are on top of each other, working their jobs from home with that flexibility, that's not an ideal situation. Now we have homeschooling and dual income families with two workers at home. So I think the point is, return to office, or as I said, maybe reopening offices or work from office, has to be a compelling option that gives people something they can't get. And I would venture to say, those organizations who have legacy offices with a lot of private offices, they need to start thinking about those, turning those private offices into assets and daily hoteling, where who can get a private office at home? Probably very few.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot of reopening of offices without a lot of major reconfiguration, which I think is smart in the short term, because in the long run, we need, as Mike keeps saying, we need data about the pilots and the experiments and the patterns that are emerging in terms of how people are actually utilizing these assets. So we're going to definitely see a lot fewer desks in open plan. That will go away. Obviously, more collaboration spaces for the togetherness of in our chart. But I think Leisman has done a fabulous job at explaining that those who have had a very positive work from home experience, the competition to draw those people back to an office, you've got to give them as good or better than that experience. And most Leisman scores in the middle of the index don't do that. Even only the Leisman Plus do. So, I think the recommendation there is, yes, it's all going to be about collaboration and the meetings that we've all missed in person. But don't overlook that it's not just going to be a bunch of meeting rooms on steroids. It's going to have to address the accommodation of individual focused work for those people who need it part or all that day, who may decide that working from home is not the best option.
That's a great segue. And I realize this is a little difficult to see, so let me see if I can make that a little bigger. First, let me make this point that I completely agree with you, and this is entirely overlooked, I think, by most of the industry. And I hate to make generalized statements, but I do think that's true. The well-being of your occupants or your employees isn't really the top 3 or 4 things to think about in terms of back to office or hybrid workplace or work from anywhere. And I think that's a missed opportunity. So in that bucket, in that persona, health and well-being of your occupants and your employees, it does make sense to have some areas still dedicated to head down focus work. And how do you support that type of cognitive necessity within those spaces? Maybe it's a biophilic type zone where you're able to get work done, or maybe it's more of a coffee type zone, but it's understood that that's the place that you would go if you're trying to get focus work done, as opposed to just social and meeting spaces. And I do think that's important for us to stay focused on that.
Yeah, and we can go through a longer list of recommendations, but I think that's number 1, as you said, James. It's like address employee concerns first. Am I safe? Is it healthy? Is it easy and convenient? Is it reducing my daily stress level? If it's not doing those things, the other 9 or 10 recommendations don't matter much.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And exactly to that, there's some information. I believe this might even be from McKinsey. I'll take a look here in a second. This is not Cognitive's research, but it was very insightful. Basically, what this survey data was showing that companies that reported over 25% revenue growth during the pandemic did certain things, and 72% of those companies that achieved that type of growth were the first to experiment with new technologies during the crisis. And I think that is really important to unpack. They were the first to experiment with technology in order to figure out how to optimize business process and work. It's an iterative process that we need to get into, right? We should be really focused on thinking about pilots, and pilots in terms of, are they bettering the human experience? Are they more human centric in terms of workplace, and are they supporting the type of work that we're attempting to do in a better way? Are they easier to use? So Dan, from your perspective, what's the world look like in terms of workplace technology? Is that even a new thing? Is it a new category? And who owns it? Are you seeing these in conversations?
I mean, certainly, and it's funny how broad of a, you get back to that idea. There's such a broad spectrum out there. In terms of owning the workplace technology, we're very lucky as a company, and I keep having to bring it back to Cunningham. We had invested in a lot of remote work technology early on, even well before the COVID crisis, and so it was such a seamless transition. More or less, really simplifying there, right? Seamless transition from working in the office to working from home that it seemed effortless, to the point where we might have even overlooked how difficult it could have been for some other companies. And really, that gets at the heart of kind of what we want to see technology do. We're adopting a lot of the language from user experience design, right? We want to reduce friction. We want discoverability. We want people to be able to take their laptops home, plug it in, and not be worried that they're going to break anything, right? IT, huge investment there. Necessity to make sure that they're able to bring these technologies to people's homes and have a robust infrastructure to support them. Where that bridges into the office itself, we need to be able to get back to the experimentation that you were just talking about. That no one likes to think about the idea of experimenting with a multi-$1,000 meeting room, right? So that's not really what we mean. We don't want to install TVs only to rip them out 3 months later. But what we want to do is try and see which places are being utilized more, so we can put the investment there. If your company ends up utilizing a lot more meeting spaces and not as many focus rooms, maybe that's where we need to put that investment in terms of the actual technology for meeting.
Yeah,
A lot of the companies that I saw doing some of this investment, right, working with companies to help them think about how they wanted to change their workplace. And a lot of it did get almost immediately was supported by both HR and IT.
Yes.
And you had IT very, very engaged with trying to understand what needle are we trying to move. I mean, we want them to be more productive. We want them to collaborate more. We want them, and so that drove that discussion on, okay, well, what does that mean to the employee? And some of the companies that we were experimenting with, these were all experiments. They told us that they didn't know where they were going, but it always involved giving the employees some level of choice. They could pick the day. They were required, actually, and that doesn't sound like choice, right? But they were required to pick a day of the week that they felt comfortable either working from home or, co-locating. This was, before COVID, right? And that allowed them to reduce the amount of space they were going to have to use to bring people into desks. And they hot desks, right? And there was all this hoteling and other types of experiments going on. So I think those companies that, were doing the technology, many times it was probably because they were doing that more around trying to get the right talent. And they knew they had to have some ability to have that talent make some choices on their own about the office.
Well, and I think what you just touched on too is kind of that feedback loop between technology and then HR interpreting and being able to make recommendations based off of that. I think that's absolutely critical for making these decisions.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. I'm gonna bring in some conversation points. I think they tie into the conversation now, right? So James said, "Hi, James." By the way, James said that he's worked for a company in the past that did pandemic planning rather than work from home planning, and I think the overall message there is, maybe you're working on a symptom, not the root cause of the problem. So, are you really broad enough in your understanding of what you're trying to solve in order to define the actual solutions that need to be deployed? And I think Daniel, hey Dan, different Dan, Daniel Theater, brought up a good point too. He's seen so many organizations talking about developing and implementing return to work or office plans without really considering flexibility, from his previous comments, without really considering flexibility or choice in and of itself. And that's caused some issues. And then that ties into what Jan has said. Said all this stuff is great, but how about levels of voice for your occupants or for your employees and what they want to do?
Right.
And I think that becomes an incredible segue, right? If we've taken all of that into account, what happens in terms of who comes into the office, when, and why? How do we define that, right? What are the insights that we need to be able to glean in order to be able to accommodate that choice? And I think there's some, and this is from a McKinsey report, so the other was from a McKinsey report as well. McKinsey, if you're out there, apparently I love your data. So it's great insights in there. But, it's around artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, robotics, sometimes I would call that cobotics, and maybe even RPA, robotic process automation. I think these are really big things that are also driving decisions and maybe even keeping us from making key decisions right now in a post-pandemic world. Let me mention a little bit about the scariest piece here, then we'll go back in some things that I think would be very beneficial in the short term. But robotics, in terms of RPA, robotic process automation, basically that means if you have a role within your company that is very process oriented, maybe back office, maybe it's invoicing, maybe it's something in accounting. If it's very process oriented, you can have that process replicated and completed within a digitized environment. And I think that makes a lot of sense, makes the organizations much more resilient, and it frees up a human being to be able to move into a role of more innovation or some other sort of more inspiring type of role. A little bit negative in its connotations, but I do think that is where organizations are thinking in terms of what's happening from a resiliency perspective, and it's a very real trend that's happening today. Now, something a little more positive on the other side. In terms of big data, if we have the right data coming in, we can draw the insights to help infer what teams will be in the office, when they'll be in the office, or maybe even if they should be in the office. But before I go off on a soapbox tangent here, I want to give Dan an opportunity to describe some thoughts just generally around these topics. Dan,
Well,
what do we think?
and I think big data, you're right, is a very interesting one. And the best way to illustrate is to talk about two potential ways of determining who's going to be in the office on a given day. Let's talk about a company that really values regenerative capabilities, sustainability. They really want to make a big green impact with everything they do. Perhaps their employee in-office strategy is based around the idea of reducing emissions. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of peaks now with when people want to be in the office. Tuesday through Thursday are big. Monday and Friday, surprisingly, no one wants to come in. How do we even out that peak so that we don't have these high usage days and keep the costs of power, water, really do our best to be good stewards of our utilities and really our wallets too. Big data can help us with that. It can help give incentive structure to when people come in and base it around an input like that. So that's one example. The other is, what if we had the ability to give people the choice, but to also incorporate preference while still allowing for some optimization. And what I think of with that is picking airline seats. I put in a list of preferences: window seats versus aisle. Wanting to be near the emergency exit or not, near the front, near the back. Maybe I pay a little extra for a little extra leg room. The computer takes all that information in, looks at all the flights available when I want to take them, and tells me, here's where you're going to be. What if we could do that with offices? What if we could, say I'm a part of this team, I'm working on these 3 projects. I would like to, make sure I'm sitting near these people. Where should I be sitting today? And let the computer make that decision. We're talking about using these inputs almost in real time to actually affect how the office is coming together. And even from there, we can see how people feel about it, get their voices heard and find out whether that's working, what's not working, and make these adjustments quickly. Don't say
Yeah,
this
Dan,
often,
just
but
to
it's an
push,
exciting time to be in office design.
to push that a little bit further, but to give the consumer on the airline the choice as to whether they want that seat on a flight that's booked 110%, or do they
Mhm.
want that seat on a flight that's booked 70%. So again, back to putting this information in the employee's hands on that day or that week to show them here's the profile of demand on space for the central office versus who's not coming in and working elsewhere. That might affect what day they want to come in.
Yeah.
Right.
Or knowing who's going to be in as their cohorts. So empowering that voice by giving them information about what the situation they're walking into is going to look like. It's not just a big algorithm, but it's it's here's the possibilities, and then you apply your preferences and say, I could go in Tuesday, but look, Wednesday's looking better to me.
I love that conversation point, and it needs to have a giant exclamation point on it. If we give, and we should, if we give the employees the option to choose, they need to be empowered with the right kind of insights in order to be able to make the right kinds of decisions. So how do we derive those insights? What are the initiatives that they're a part of? Do they understand that the small changes in behavior have large impacts in these initiatives? And that if they have the right insights, then they'll be able to inform where they or their team are able to do their best work. And I think that's missing right now in all of the conversations, really. But it's so important, I think, for us to add that in. And it goes back a little bit to this notion of, we have lots of choices for lots of systems, so let's decide what we want to do. And top of mind, I think right now for a lot of people are desk booking solutions. And it seems like a very easy type of conversation, or somewhat understood, that I just need it. If someone's going to make a choice, they have to be able to check out a desk. But there's so much more to the conversation that it involves in that. And I think a lot of it is around being able to draw data from those systems and to generate the right insights related to the data that I'm getting from those systems. And that in and of itself will decide which solutions I want to move forward with. Now, I've probably said that in a very confusing way, so I'm going to ask Dan, who's much smarter than me, to try to unpack that a little bit. Dan, in terms of choosing and selecting maybe what systems go together, what are some principles or some guidance you might offer the audience?
Accessibility is key, not only to the actual data itself and making sure it's not, contained in a walled garden, but we really like seeing when these companies give access to the employees too, or give that choice. And we also like to see concerns of privacy taken seriously. One thing we don't want to see lost in this discussion is how people feel about it. And once you start seeing your data, even aggregated, it starts to kind of make you feel like Big Brother's watching a little bit. We want to make sure that we bring people along with this discussion, that it's not something scary, that it actually offers a tangible benefit. As you were talking about, making it visible and allowing you to make decisions based off the data that you see. It's critical. In terms of the actual pieces themselves, sensor technology is becoming more and more critical, I think. We've been having a lot of discussions with, industry leaders in terms of what we can glean from this information. And we're beyond even just like which desk is occupied, right? We can find out, is this lounge area really working for people? Is it that, and one insight that I thought was interesting, not something we found out personally, but we were told by one of these vendors is, there was this really nice, comfortable lounge setting that one company had, but they were surprised to find that only one person was using it every day. Not necessarily even the same person, just one person. But what they discovered is that the arrangement of the furniture even was so close that people felt a little too uncomfortable to do their work right next to each other. The table was right at the knees, and if someone sat down right next to you, all of a sudden you're looking at each other's work. by just rearranging the furniture slightly, they can increase the usability of it. And we really like seeing that coming out of these piece of technology.
Gentlemen and ladies in the audience and on the panel here, it seems that we're out of time. We're right at 50 minutes, and there's so much more we can have a conversation about. But let me take a moment. Mike, I'm going to start with you because you're to the immediate right of me. Final thoughts for the audience. Final thoughts, suggestions. One thought that you would leave them with today would be what?
Yeah, I would just say it's about choice, right? I mean, really, at the end of the day, making the right choice is important. If you can make it sooner than later, then great. But it's about being able to make a choice, and I think that's why that analogy of the turnabout, I think, really worked for me.
Good point. And earlier we mentioned it before we hopped on the live event. You can stay in that center lane and drive around a few times until you get the choice right that you want to go.
Absolutely, no one's going to stop you from doing that.
Exactly right. Yeah, but certainly, yeah, absolutely.
You feel foolish doing it, but hey.
Look, kids, Big Ben. Sorry, I'm never going to stop saying that joke. Gary, let me go to you. Final thoughts for the audience who are listening.
Well, I would just say, organizations that are trying to put their policies and practices in place, balancing a management perspective with workforce preferences. And I say workforce because we're not talking about only employees anymore. We're talking about access to talent, which may never want to be an employee of that company. But giving them all a work experience would be part of that balance. Not free for all at one extreme and not edict at the other. But I think companies who adopt a healthy approach to that balance are going to be in good shape 1 or 2 years from now.
Love it. Dan, same question. Final thoughts for the audience.
Sure. I'd say, at the end of the day, don't be afraid to experiment. Trying something out's better than doing nothing at all. And, include your employees in that discussion about what they want to see, and then react, pivot, work, go from there.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. My final thought of the day, in summation, and I can't possibly put that together in just a few seconds with all the great information that you guys have provided, but the notion that it's okay to take an iterative approach to your pilot programs. Experimentation is very important to figure this out. Work from anywhere is probably better thinking from a context perspective than either office or home. And making the accommodations, maybe not immediately, maybe your policies or procedures or constraints won't allow you to develop a work from anywhere policy procedure, but knowing that that's probably something that's just going to be our culture at some point in the future, moving in that direction from a policies and procedures perspective, from an alignment, from a change management perspective, and being able to provide insights to all of your employees to know where best to do their work in a work from anywhere situation is something that you need to do the research on. With that, let me say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Michael, Dan, Gary, and everybody in the audience. And we'll see you again next month.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks.
See you guys later.